All right. Hi, everyone. Thank you for joining me this afternoon for this presentation. My name is Nirvana Ramtahal, and I am a doctoral intern at the Counseling Center. So today I am going to be talking about social media use during the COVID-19 pandemic, how our youth, adolescents, and young adults are being impacted. Let me go ahead and just present to you all with a brief overview of this presentation. I will be providing you all with statistics for social media use during the pandemic, and then we're going to talk about some of the harmful effects of social media. I will then show some tips for adults with minors who have been engaging in excessive social media use. And then I'll also talk about the positive effects of social media during the pandemic. I will also give some tips for better practices, ways in which you all can interact with social media in a healthier manner. And then I will present alternative activities to reduce or replace excessive social media use. At the end of the presentation, I will leave time for questions and comments. And for those of you who are tuned in, can you please be sure to pop those questions or comments into the Q&A box and not the chat box. All right, so before we move forward, I just want to say that the purpose of this presentation is to highlight how the pandemic has affected social media use among the youth and young adult population. So this presentation will focus on the negative impact of excessive social media use. It is not intended to depict social media use as an exclusively negative practice, but rather a mechanism that can become harmful if not monitored or used mindfully. All right, now before we get into some of those stats, I posed a few questions, and this can be considered maybe some food for thought, but how many of you feel like there are not enough hours in the day? How many of you feel tired all the time? How many of you own a smartphone or smart device? How many of you check that smart device as soon as you wake up in the morning? And have you checked your screen time lately? And did you know that you can see which apps are taking up your time? So don't worry, I am not judging anyone. I do not pose these questions to be judgmental of the way that you all interact with your smartphones. But I ask these questions because if you answered yes to any of them, your social media use might actually explain why. So let's talk about life in lockdown. For many adolescents and young adults, more time at home during the ongoing coronavirus 2019 lockdown has meant more time glued to a screen. So there has been research that is reporting these findings. And additionally, it makes sense because social distancing and limitations on daily life during the pandemic have left social gaps to be filled by the internet. And with that being said, the next couple of slides will demonstrate how social media use has increased as a direct result of the pandemic. So here I have depicted in this graph the average monthly visits in 2020 and the change from 2019. So as we can see, it looks like Facebook had over 25 billion visits in 2020, and this was a 3% increase from 2019. So that's kind of the way that this data is being interpreted. If we move down to TikTok, which most of you are probably familiar with by now, we can see that there has been an almost 600% increase in the average monthly visits of this platform. So that's pretty telling. And additionally, as the COVID-19 pandemic has progressed over the past year and a half, social media usage in individuals 12 years and older has also increased, raising the estimated users on social media to 233 million people. And this is according to a report from the Infinite Dial. So let's move forward to another graph. So this graph shows the average number of minutes that US users have spent on social media platforms each day in 2020. All right, so I'm seeing a range between 27.7 minutes to 34.6 minutes. So it looks like on average, there's about 30 minutes per day that individuals are spending on social media. Now, I often hear so many people express that they do not believe they have the time of the day or that they can make time for other activities that are really important to them. And as we just mentioned, it looks like the average amount of time being spent on social media in the US is about 30 minutes. This might not seem like a lot of time, but the reality is a lot can be accomplished in 30 minutes. I mean, that's half an hour of more sleep that you could be getting. So if we kind of just think about things in that way, if you were to be told you had an extra 30 minutes of free time in your day and what you would do with that, maybe think about that in terms of how you could replace time on social media with those activities. So despite the increased need for social support during the pandemic, researchers are finding a link between compulsive social media use and increased feelings of anxiety and depression, most notably in adolescents. So I want to just spend some time talking about the key word here being compulsive. And I want to say that and highlight that because, again, this presentation is not about casting a poor light on social media, but rather to present the effects of excessive social media use that has been exacerbated by the pandemic. So what does this look like? Well, we have seen that with excessive or compulsive social media use from the pandemic, this has resulted in poor sleep, irritability associated with anxiety and depression, decreased attention span, lack of physical activity, lower self-esteem, increased dependency on a smart device leading to possible internet addiction, experiences with cyberbullying, and a rise in suicide rates. And these are not the only effects, but these are some of the more notable ones. So the next few slides will go into further details about some of these observed effects. So let's get a closer look into poor sleep. In 2018, a British study found that social media was linked to decreased, disrupted, and delayed sleep, all of which are factors contributing to sleep disorders like insomnia and sleep deprivation. So sleep problems are associated with depression, memory loss, and poor academic performance. And these are all factors that over time are linked to decreased self-worth. And I also want to note that there has been it has been found that there is a bidirectional relationship between lack of sleep and social media use. So what do I mean by that? Essentially, if you can't sleep, you're likely to get on your phone and maybe use your social media. But when you're on your phone, that then causes you to further disrupt your sleep. So it's this cycle that happens. It's like you can't sleep, so you use your phone, but then when you get on your phone, it makes it harder for you to get to sleep. So that's what I mean by bidirectional relationship. So let's get a closer look into attention span. So according to a 2018 research study that was conducted, kids that use cell phones frequently were more likely to show symptoms of ADHD. This is most likely due to how notifications are triggered, causing that sense of instant gratification through entertainment and social media apps. So according to 2016 CDC data, ADHD affects over 6 million US children. And I'm sure that number has since increased. And there are also studies that are trying to kind of understand how attention spans are being affected. So there's the idea that our attention spans have decreased. And I think there's a number that says our attention spans are now down to 8 or 9 seconds. So there are not studies that have formally demonstrated this data, but it is hypothesized that social media use leads to a decrease in attention span. And the way that I also think about this is a lot of the time when individuals are interacting with social media, just no matter what the platform is, it could be Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Reddit. There's a lot of that mindless scrolling that takes place. So it just kind of looks a lot like this, just scrolling and scrolling without even really being conscious of what is the information that's being obtained. And then I think it's also important to just kind of know that these platforms such as TikTok or Instagram or some of the other ones that were mentioned, they capture one's attention through these short videos, and they were intentionally designed to do so. They were created with the intention of keeping their users absorbed in their media. And what that does is it creates this subconscious dependency for individuals to want to always turn to their phones. And speaking of dependency, that is going to lead us right into our next slide, addictive properties. So social media addiction is not currently recognized as a formal disorder that can be diagnosed to individuals. However, internet addiction is recognized as a disorder, and while it's more of a contemporary issue, there are defined treatment protocols to address this type of addiction. Social media addiction can be understood as an extension of internet addiction, and it is projected for social media addiction to have its own formal diagnosis, and I imagine that might happen somewhere in the near future. So this implies that there will be more specialized or specific treatment measures that differ from the interventions for treating internet addiction. And while there are some differences between the two concepts, social media versus internet addiction, a lot of what we're seeing is that these similarities kind of manifest in a lot of these properties. So we have the loss or lack of control during engagement with social media, a preoccupation with the phone or with social media, withdrawal symptoms in the absence of social media being used as a coping mechanism, and social media interfering with the completion of everyday activities and responsibilities. So these are some of the findings that are being associated with social media addiction. Let's talk about cyberbullying. So this is data that has come out, I think, in 2020, but about 69% of young Black Americans and about 67% of young Hispanic Americans encounter racist content online and on social media. And then additionally, we have about 74% of our LGBTQ youth who encounter homophobic content online and on social media. About 64% of them report moderate to severe depression. That's twice of those who do not identify within the LGBTQ community. And 19% of those individuals are at risk of alcohol and substance abuse. So these statistics are rather alarming and they are unfortunate, but they are a reality of what's out there, what is online, and what young minds have access to when they are interacting with social media. These results are based on a study with a sample size of more than 1,500 14 to 22-year-olds who were surveyed. So again, very, very young individuals. And essentially, this study is highlighting the fact that increased social media exposure lends way for more exposure to hateful rhetoric, such as racism, sexism, and even body shaming. Let's talk about self-esteem. So multiple studies have shown a link between social media and feelings of inadequacy about one's life or their appearances. There's also the idea of fear of missing out. It's also been dubbed FOMO. And then there is just a lot of comparing behaviors that take place on social media. I know that for the limited interactions I have had, I'm definitely guilty of doing that, just kind of looking at what I'm seeing and maybe comparing my own life against that. And then determining one's value based on social wealth or social currency. So the idea here is that the more followers a person has, we tend to perceive those individuals as more valuable or desirable. And a lot of these concepts, we don't really think about them. We're interacting in this way and we're having these experiences, but we're not really consciously thinking about the fact that we are engaging in these constant comparisons, or maybe we're thinking about ourselves in a way that feels inadequate or lesser. And I think this would just be a good time to talk about how so much of social media is curated in a manner for people to present their best selves online. And that creates standards that others both consciously and subconsciously absorb. So there are images that are often altered or manipulated, and a lot of effort is taken to produce that perfect image. And a lot of the time, the context behind that final product is missing. And then I think that what happens is people end up creating these unrealistic ideals for themselves based on what they see, and they end up feeling distressed when they aren't able to meet those ideas or self-expectations. This is an important conversation to have because younger individuals whose minds are still developing are more prone to internalizing feelings of inadequacy. They think that they're deficient in some way or that they're not good enough. And what I would say is practicing gratitude by diverting your attention to your personal sources of happiness is a good way to kind of combat some of those effects. So what's next? This is just my way of inserting a little humor to lighten up the mood after those last few slides. Well, if you are a parent, a guardian, or an educator, here are a few things that you can do. So the first one, take charge. Do not be afraid to monitor your children's or your students' screen time. Talk to them about the many effects of social media, whether that be the good, the bad, or the ugly. Additionally, get involved. Find ways to interact with your children or your students that will keep them interested and both social. So this can be an excellent opportunity to bond, develop, or strengthen those relationships. And then be creative. And this does not have to be expensive. Think of activities that everyone will enjoy. Remember, so create opportunities for those to learn and develop something new. And then I think it's also important to just approach individuals who are maybe interacting with social media with a sense of compassion. Demonstrate your willingness to meet them where they're at and arrive at a point of understanding for what they might be experiencing. So as we've learned from the past few slides, social media use may be indicative of so many other underlying concerns. So we don't ever want to shame those individuals who might be using social media in a way that appears harmful. And if you're a person who uses social media, that's great. So remember, social media itself isn't bad. It's all about how you use it. It's about how you relate to it, how you're interacting with it, and just remembering to be mindful with the ways in which you're using it. So it is true that social media can provide opportunities, sources for information, improved mental health, and comfort in connection. So with the number of restrictions people have been facing as a direct result of the pandemic, those being social distancing, travel bans, business closures, and overall isolation from quarantine, social media has become a reliable and desirable platform for people to socially connect, network, entertain themselves, receive employment or financial gain, and to learn news and other information. When social media was being utilized for the purpose of engaging in social support during the pandemic, people experienced improved mental health. Social media users found comfort in being able to connect through the sharing of real-time pictures, audio, messages, and videos, and have overall access to communicate with loved ones. So again, social media has a lot of positives to it. It is not something that is bad. It's all about the ways in which we are interacting with it, finding purpose and meaning and intention with how we use social media. That makes all the difference. So for better practice, pay attention. It's important for you to be aware of your usage, and most phones have the ability to show you your screen time. And be honest and check in with yourself. Ask yourself if it's hard to be apart from your smartphone or your device for at least 30 minutes at a time. If you're feeling some difficulty with that, that might be a sign or an indicator that you have to maybe pay attention to the way that you're interacting with your phone. And then practice mindful and moderate media use. So most phones are equipped with reminders or apps to let you know when it's time to take a break. So here are some options for when you want to ditch the smartphone or social media rather, but catch up on rest. I know that that's something we could all use. Discover a new passion or learn something new. Use the time spent on social media to do something you've always wanted to do but never had the time for. Give yourself a healthy challenge. Exercise. Meditate. Create art. So draw, sing, cook, write, make music, or even build. Play a game. Spend time with your loved ones if you can, or do a service activity. Studies do show that that increases happiness. Well, folks, that is the end of my presentation. And at this point, I would love to reserve time for any questions and comments. Thank you. So for our participants, if you do have any questions or comments, please feel free to pop those in the Q&A, and I will be here to respond to those. I do see we have someone who has just joined us. I want to let you know that I've just completed the presentation and I am at the Q&A section or portion. but this presentation will be posted on YouTube, I believe, so there will be access to the content. So again, if anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to pop those in the Q&A box. Thank you. All right, folks. Well, I think I am going to end here. It looks like we don't have a lot of questions. So yeah, again, my name is Nirvana. I'm an intern at the Counseling Center, and I appreciate your time.